responded more promptly. I'll look into the matter immediately, but it should not be. Hey, you should. It's not that difficult to call my office. My door is always open. Question number 1 stands in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Has the tax switch he promised would leave no one worse off, fully compensated all New Zealanders for the rise in the cost of living over the last year? If not, which groups are worse off?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that was not the point of the tax switch. The tax switch compensated, in most cases, more than compensated people for the increase in GST by reducing income taxes across the board and by increasing benefits working for families and superannuation. Truth of that can be shown by the fact that no party is campaigning on reversing the tax switch unless Mr Goff intends to adopt about his 8th position on this topic.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
To the Prime Minister, are parents on average wages like Deborah Bullock and Gemma Craig, who each have 2 children in early childhood education and who respectively are paying $70 a week more and $60 a week more for their children's early childhood education as a result of his cuts, worse off?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, obviously I don't have the details of those individuals, but what I would say is that the bulk of early childhood facilities did not need to increase their fees, and the reason for that is they are not 80% teacher-led. Depending on where those individuals live, they may choose to go and take their children to another early childhood facility if they want to do that. But I might add, Mr Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition was asked yesterday about when he was going to restore funding to early childhood facilities, what he started talking about was in the never never, and it was desirable, not necessarily something that was going to happen.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, now that petrol prices have reached $2.18 a litre, does he stand by his position that government should do something to help the consumer with the price of petrol made 3 years ago when he was Leader of the Opposition?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, we are doing everything that we possibly can, but even the member will accept that we are not responsible for what's happening in Libya or other parts of the world. But what we have done, Mr Speaker, is keep control of rising prices, as is demonstrated by the fact that the CPI has been running at much lower levels than it did under a Labor government.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, if he claims that he is not responsible for petrol prices, why was he demanding 3 years ago that the government do something to bring petrol prices down when he's only added to it by putting GST on the tax that people are already paying on petrol and making them pay still more?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I've said, those who are paying more for petrol because of a higher GST, which is correct, are also those who are getting more through the tax switch. And if the member wants to reverse the position, he should fire up the bus, get a petrol one and really make his point.
Chris Tremaine.
My question to the Prime Minister. How have tax cuts compensated people for price rises in the past?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, funnily up a hand I have...
I apologise to the Prime Minister. A member has the right to ask a question, and the House does have the right to hear an answer. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, funnily enough to hand, I do have an example. It's between September 1999 and September 2008. Prices rose a total of 29% in that time, and there were no income tax cuts whatsoever. None. That means if Mr Goff is being consistent, he would have to admit that the Labor government left people 29% worse off after its time in office. Actually, the truth is they left them much worse off than 29%, but he should at least admit that bit.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, does he believe that middle-income families will be rationing milk to their children, as he alleged 3 years ago when a litre of home-brand milk from Foodtown was 20% cheaper than it is today?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what people do in their individual homes is not something I can be responsible for. But what I can say is let's take someone on the average after-tax wage, in the last 12 months, it's risen from $39,518 to $42,214, which is a rise of 6.8% in real terms, Mr Speaker. Even including the GST increase, prices rose 4%.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, do I take it from the Prime Minister that he disagrees with the Salvation Army when it says that right across the country there is unprecedented demand for food parcels from people who are in work, because incomes for people on low to middle incomes are rising much slower than the price of goods?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on balance, yes, I do disagree with the last bit of it. I'm not disagreeing that there are more people using food banks, and I think that is the result of a recession which has been pretty deeply in New Zealand. But what I can say is if one looks at average after-tax wage increases in the time that this government has been in office, it's risen 10%. In the entire time Labor was in office, it rose 4%.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Is the Prime Minister aware that of the people being referred by Work and Income for budget advice today, now 30% of them are in jobs, but they're being referred because they cannot cope with the rising cost of living on everything, the highest increase in the cost of living in 20 years under his government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the best measure of rising prices in the economy is Stats New Zealand's representation through the CPI. It rose last year, in the last 12 months, 4%, and that included a 2.2% increase for GST. So net on net, it was 1.8%, because the rest was compensated for. The last year of a Labor government alone was 5.1%. So how that can be the highest in 20 years is beyond me.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, is he denying the Department of Statistics, or Statistics New Zealand's, figures that show that the cost of living have risen by the highest level in 20 years, and at the same time, for last year, the year to June 2010, median weekly income actually fell by 1.7%?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the member has his numbers wrong, as he so often does. So let us go back to the illustration of economics. Stats New Zealand over the past 12 months have said that overall prices in the whole economy rose by an average of 4%. That included a 2.2% increase for GST, which was an average of 1.8% increase. The last year of Labor, food prices rose 10.8% and prices across the economy rose 5.1%. If I go to Stats New Zealand again and look at after-tax average wages, they increased in the last 12 months by from $39,518 to $42,214, which was an increase of 6.8%. And you see, Mr Speaker, the reason the Labor Party doesn't want to look at the numbers is because that would tell them the truth. The truth is that yes, times are tough, but the truth is the government is making quite a lot of concessions in terms of tax rates, and that is helping raise after-tax wages.
Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
My point of order is this, Mr Speaker. I seek leave of the House to table from Statistics New Zealand, hot off the press.
Order. We don't table documents from Stats New Zealand. They're available to all members. The standing orders. Point of order, the Honourable David Payne.
Point of order is, sir, that was a very, very long answer with lots of assertion in it. And I would hope that the Leader of the Opposition is given as much latitude in his next question to make as much assertion.
The member will resume his seat. Order. Now, the member just should reflect on what he's just said. For a start, it wasn't a point of order, and he claimed that the Prime Minister had made assertions in his answer. Answers are always, good answers should contain some facts. And that's what... Order, and the Prime Minister appeared to be quoting from a Stats New Zealand release. Now, There is absolutely nothing out of order about that. If he was complaining the Prime Minister went on a little long, perhaps I was getting a bit concerned about that. But supplementary question to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, or... No, OK. We move to... That'll do. Order. 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 That was my fault, and I don't want the House to... Question number 2, Dr.